Hi, my name is Carrie Nelson and we're introducing Summer Moon. This is a block of the month that have done with Kimberly and Sarah and everybody at It's So Emma. It is a quilt that when it was designed, the idea was something different. I confess I've always liked the variety of blocks in a sampler quilt, but I was never a big fan when they were all lined up. They're beautiful, they're just not me, so I was trying to think of something different when I was making blocks for another project. I had this idea in my head of how I wanted it to look. I wasn't sure how I was going to get there, but I got lucky and it kind of came out the way I envisioned it, which is sometimes a little scary. I knew that I wanted pieces, random pieces in, so that you weren't really sure how it was pieced. I wanted different size blocks. I wanted some negative space, but not a lot of it. I wanted a lot of piecing and a lot of variety to it. So that's how Summer Moon came about. And there are 24 blocks. Each one is made in 3 different sizes, or can be made in 3 different sizes. I highly recommend and encourage you to go ahead and try the 4.5-inch blocks. If you're new or newer and you haven't done a lot of tiny piecing, they're fun to try, but if it really, or you're not happy with the results, go ahead and make 2 of the 6-inch or 2 of the 7.5-inch. It's fine, because even if your results aren't exactly perfect, the blocks are finished with frames that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but they're very forgiving. It's going to let you adjust, add a little more, and then have blocks at the very end that are all the same size. One of the things that I'm going to talk about really quickly, there are a couple of terms that throughout the videos for the blocks that I'm going to be talking about are connector corners. I refer to them that way because that's how I learned them. They were from Mary Ellen Hopkins' book, It's Okay If You Sit on My Quilt, and it was a way of adding corner triangles to pieces like snowball blocks, square and a square units, flying geese, where you weren't cutting templates. You remember people used to do that. But you were able to get the same results in an easier method. They're also called folded corners. I'm sure there's probably a couple of other terms. Those are the terms that I hear the most: connected corners and folded corners. And I'm going to show you a couple of quick things on ways to do them. The easiest way is to take a background square, draw a diagonal line from one corner to the opposing corner. Remember, that is your stitching line. You're not going to be stitching 1/4 inch on either side. That is your stitching line. You're going to want to use a very fine point pen. It can be something like the friction pens, it can be a micron, but you want it to be very, very fine. This is not the time to pull out your Sharpie. You also want it to not bleed through the fabric, which both of those pens are really good. They won't do that. You can draw the line, you're going to put it in the corner, and you're going to stitch on the line. Sometimes, depending on the thread you're using, you might want to actually stitch right next to it. That's if you're using a thicker, heavier thread. If you're using something like 50 weight Aurifil, you can stitch right on that line and not have any problems. So that's the draw the line method. Another really good method is to use something like a seam guide. This Seems So Easy is a perfect one. You're going to cut this piece out, use this with the needle right there. There's got a little marker and you want to save that piece. Do not lose that piece. Save it, tape it to your machine, put it in a vault. Keep that piece, because every time you take this off and put it back on, you need that piece to get it lined up properly. You're going to line it up, and then instead of drawing lines to stitch along the center, you're going to feed this through, keeping your lead point and your dragging point right on the center line. That's going to allow you to stitch right exactly on it. Make sure that your sewing machine needle is in the center position. If it is not, your seam is going to be too big or too small. That's another method. The other one is to use a ruler that is designed for folded corners. This one by Antler Quilt Design, Doug Lico. There's a terrific video that shows you more on how to do it. The instructions are really good. There's also a way to be able to oversize these to trim. But for this is what works really well. You're going to put your ruler down. I'm probably getting this backwards because I'm doing it upside down. But you're going to line up the edge of the square. You're going to see that the diagonal line is going to go right from point to point. You're going to be able to trim that off, and now you can feed these through using your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. You're going to press them up. The other thing to remember on these is be careful with your pressing. I tend to be a somewhat aggressive presser, using the edge of my iron to kind of push that seam. And since I also press with steam, that can sometimes distort it. Most of the problems that come from not having these pieces be exactly the way they're supposed to be, they usually come from pressing as opposed to real stitching issues. When you're stitching this, I will say this really quickly. If you're stitching inside the piece, you need to take those stitches out and redo them. If you've stitched outside, like on this part that you're going to be trimming off, just pick up your needle, go back and restitch. Don't worry about taking those out. When these are all done, you're going to go ahead and say you've got them. You can either trim these by using your scissors, it's a small, or if you use the lines on your rotary mat, you can go ahead and line up your piece, stack them off a little bit, put your ruler line, 1/4 inch, right on your stitching line, and just cut off a whole bunch at a time. These are, if you like really, really tiny triangles, yes, you can stitch a 1/2 inch away, but these are really small. If you want to do something with them, will you send me a picture, because I'd really love to see it. But that's folded corners, connector corners. And that's it. I hope you have fun with Summer Moon.